Hello everyone, thank you very much for attending today's webinar on how a file fabric can help your company to enforce the GDPR across your existing data. As you might know, the General Data Protection Regulation comes into force in May 2018, and it will be demanding significant data protection safeguards to be implemented by organizations. So my name is Ana de Jorge, and I'm in charge of the marketing department at Storage Made Easy. And today I'm very excited to introduce our presenters, Jim Liddell, our CEO at Storage Made Easy, and Doug Soltes, our Director of Product Solutions. Welcome, both of you.
Well, thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
So just a reminder, before we get started, there will be a recorded version of this webinar available, and please feel free to ask any of your questions in the chat box. We will try to answer all of them at the end of the session. We will also provide, of course, our contact details for us to continue any discussion after the webinar. And let's take a look at the agenda for today. Is the next slide, please? Thanks, Zach. So basically, the presenters will start with an introduction about the GDPR, of course, and then they will be addressing the challenges facing your enterprise around allowing business to monitor, secure and audit all data silos, and enforcing governance and control of data. So having said that, Jim and Doug, would you like to start with the session?
You bet, Anna. So, hey, Jim, why don't you kick it off by just bring everyone up to speed with some quick facts on GDPR?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. So as Anna said, this webinar will be in two halves, really. The first half, I will give a quick overview about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. And in the second half, we thought that unlike some of the GDPR webinars that you may have seen, we wanted to actually, put some substance behind it and show you what a best effort of trying to enforce GDPR in a company would look like using our product, the File Fabric. So the GDPR was first proposed in January 2012, actually formally approved in April 2016, and it's going to be applicable from the 25th of May 2018, so under a year now. It's a regulation by the European Parliament and also the Council of the European Union, and its main intent was to strengthen and unify data protection for all individuals within the European Union, but also to address the export of personal data outside the European Union. Its primary objectives are really to give control back to European citizens and residents of their personal data, and also to simplify the current regulatory environment for international businesses by unifying regulation within the EU. So the basic rule is that each organization needs to be able to demonstrate compliance. So if your company is deemed to be involved in what they term high-risk processing, you are obliged to perform a data privacy impact assessment, or a DPIA, as the GDPR references it. The GDPR states that these assessments should evaluate in particular the origin, the nature, and the severity of that risk. And the outcome of the assessment should be taken into account when determining the appropriate measures to be taken in your company. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jim, one thing that you've got on that slide is it'll supersede any national laws. And obviously, I'm a U.S. citizen, and of course, we have a bunch of people on the line from the EU. You spoke about EU, but maybe you could talk for a second about how it's going to affect American companies as well.
So I think it's based on that second tenet of export of personal data outside of the EU. So the premise is that any company that's dealing with European personal data, either in or out of the EU, will need to be GDPR compliant. So any service provider, any company with international offices, anybody that deals with European personal data, no matter where they are in the world, will need to be GDPR compliant, or they may face some fines, which are pretty severe, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
No, thank you.
So the definition of personal data as defined by the GDPR is stronger than what people, particularly in America, probably are used to. P2 is a common term used in North America, and it refers to what is relatively a narrow range of data, such as name, address, birth date, social security number, financial information, credit cards, bank accounts. But personal data in the context of GDPR covers a much wider range of information, and that can include social media posts, photographs, lifestyle references, transaction histories, even actually IP addresses. So any American company that does business in the EU needs to be fully compliant with GDPR by May the 25th. So even if that company has no presence in the EU, as long as you market to EU residents, even if it's through the web, you will need to comply with the GDPR.
What about European citizens here in the U.S. consuming, American services? So, for example, if I'm a moving company or I'm a American shop that sells, socks or something like that, and I take in this information, does GDPR cover that as well, or is that just our normal, stocks and other regulations?
So if the person is European but resides in the US and has moved to the US and is no longer deemed as an EU citizen by legislation, then it will come within the boundaries of the local legislation. If the person is an EU citizen and is working in the US but living in the EU, then GDPR would apply. Next slide, please.
Of course.
So the GDPR is a concept of data controllers or data processors. A data controller collects data from EU residents, and a data processor processes data on behalf of the data controller. And the regulation applies if the data controller obviously collects data from the EU residents, and it also applies if the data processor processes data on behalf of EU residents, even if they don't necessarily reside in the EU. So what we're starting to see is that some larger organizations are starting to appoint, what they're formally terming a data protection officer, to act basically as the figurehead to police the data controllers and the data processors. So even if your company is perhaps smaller or too small to appoint a dedicated data protection officer or a DPO, you really should consider thinking about having somebody as the lead for data protection within your organization, particularly as it appertains towards GDPR. Next slide, please. So the GDPR, lays out some core principles of, personal data collection, which are pretty useful. They have them in the articles. We've pulled them out here. Personal data must be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. Personal data can only be collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes. The personal data must be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary for processing. The personal data must be accurate and kept up to date, which is interesting because it also talks about how you can keep that personal data up to date and how many times you need to go back to the person whose personal data you keep and to make sure that you have accurate records. The personal data must be kept in a form such that the data subject can be identified only as long as is necessary for processing. And the personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures its security. And it has, some specific, hints around encryption and means to ensure that personal data is secure, without being explicit about what type of encryption should be used. Next slide, please. So what else is in the GDPR? Because it's a huge document. It talks about a lot of different things. Clearly, in the context of this webinar, we're not going to get through the entirety of what composes the GDPR. So we thought we'd pull out, some of the higher level, principles that would appertain to most companies. So most companies are going to need to update their privacy and consent notices. They've got to be explicit, particularly around what data you're collecting and why you're collecting it. Also, consent. If people are consenting right now to allow you to process personal data or collect personal data, that consent must be explicit. And if you end up having an audit, then that consent must be verifiable. So right now, many people have click-through consent-based forms on websites without actually logging that consent. So that's something that will need to be changed. The other thing that the GDPR talks about is that consent is not forever. You need to regularly go back to the person who gave you the consent to make sure that they still consent for you to process their personal data. The other thing that the GDPR talks about is the right of the individual to request access to their personal data to see what you hold. That's changed from what is within the current data protection regulations. And companies will have 30 days to comply to any subject access request. So you'll need to put internal processes in place to allow you to fulfill that. And in most cases, the GDPR talks about no charge for people being able to make subject access requests. The GDPR also talks a lot about data breach, and there is a new breach notification requirement in which companies who are breached must ensure that they tell their customers that they've been breached and what steps they are taking. Breach reporting can also lead to a very heavy fine. Also, individual rights have changed. Individuals will have the right to erase their personal data from what you hold, and also to correct it if it's wrong. There's also the concept of the processing of data, the legal basis of it, and you need to explain that within your privacy notice and even in the subject access requests. Next slide, please. So the first step for any company is going to be preparing for GDPR. It's actually not too far away now, although it might seem so in terms of being 9 months, 10 months. But we've put down some steps with regards to GDPR preparation. We've also worked with an analyst to promote quite a comprehensive white paper in terms of what a company may want to look at in terms of GDPR preparation. I would advise any company who's going to be affected by GDPR to start thinking about the GDPR compliance now. So what sort of things do you have to do? Well, it's going to affect the people in control of the company. So it's key that you secure buy-in from key people. Those key people will be senior executives within the business and board members. It's also key that you understand the difference between the current law and the GDPR for your particular business and what it does. And you'll need to concentrate and fill in the gaps. Remember that the GDPR places greater emphasis on the documentation that data controllers must keep to demonstrate accountability. That's key. Certain parts of the GDPR are going to have more of an operational impact on some companies than others. But one of the things that will need to be done is a full data audit across the entire company. You'll need to document what data you have currently and where you got it from prior to the GDPR. You'll also need to understand and document what data you have and who you're sharing it with. So what data do you have? Where did it come from? Who are you sharing it with? These are key principles for GDPR accountability. So if I had to think about that preparation list, it would be awareness. What information do you hold? How are you communicating the privacy of that information? How are you making sure that you protect individual rights? What process do you have in place for subject access requests? What's your legal basis for holding that data? Do you have verifiable consent? Do you have a data breach policy in place? Have you done a data protection assessment and design? And do you have somebody who's running point on data protection in your organization? Next slide, please. So this is a pretty scary slide in terms of what the fines can be for non-compliance. So the highest fine is up to 20 million euros or 4% of gross turnover. So note that it's 4% of gross turnover, not net turnover. That can make a huge difference, certainly for smaller companies who are run mostly for non-profit if they were found to be non-GDPR compliant. Because in many cases, 4% of gross turnover will wipe them out. But there are also other things that can be done to the company. That's the highest fine. So in the sort of lowest is a warning in writing. So especially if it's the first and non-intentional compliance. Also, you can be forced to have regular periodic data protection audits. And then we get into the larger fines. So, one of the fines is 10 million euros or 2% of the gross turnover. And then we get onto the very high fine, which we've got here, 20 million euros or 4% of gross turnover. So this obviously is pretty serious, for any company. So it's key to ensure that not only are you prepared for GDPR, you understand the data in your organization and you've taken some of the steps that we've talked about, but also that ongoing you enforce and police the data that you have and continue to process and collect. Next slide, please. So a summary of the GDPR and the bare minimum requirements. Any company is going to need to maintain accurate records of all sensitive personal data storage and processing and understand what they keep and be able to demonstrate why they keep it. Companies are going to need to add processes that basically recognize and account for personal data privacy. And the next piece is really key because it's talked about in the GDPR documentation. If you get hit by a GDPR regulator, you need to be able to demonstrate a best effort to comply with the GDPR. What have you done to ensure that the data that you hold and collect is protected, is secure, and that you have made a best effort? That's a term directly pulled from the GDPR regulations, a best effort to comply with the GDPR. Now in this next section, when I hand over to Doug, he's going to talk about the Storage Made Easy File Fabric and how it can aid you in making that best effort to comply with the GDPR and to police your data. Over to you, Doug.
Great, Jim. Well, thank you very much. So like Jim said, we want to show you how the File Fabric can aid you in that GDPR. And one of the things that we see today is that companies have data, and this data is being spread across silos. You've got it in Salesforce, Dropbox. In the past, we called this kind of data, rogue data, or IT administrators would call it, stealth data, because users are putting it out there. And today, even if the company intends to put data out in other sources, so we've seen a number of hacks recently against, say, Amazon with users not properly securing S3 buckets, and from big companies, contractors for the federal government here in the US, Verizon putting a bunch of personal data out and not securing it properly. Anything like that gets out of control is going to be a violation of GDPR. And so the challenge is really, how are you going to secure that data? Now, of course, the File Fabric is not a silver bullet. There's plenty of data in databases and other systems as well. But I think we see overwhelmingly that the breaches out there and the data that is out of control is the personal data. It's the Excel files, the Word documents, these spreadsheets and whatnot that are used intimately inside of companies. And it's really hard to enforce policies on some of this data. In fact, when we've looked through different analyst papers, we found that up to 85% of users are using unsanctioned file sharing tools. And again, these are clear violations of GDPR that can get you into hot water and hit you with a couple of those fines. And so what does using the File Fabric to actually bring your company up to speed with GDPR look like? Well, the first thing is we need to have a strong authentication system. And so you want to make sure that the users using your system are authenticated by industry best software. That's going to be your LDAP, your Active Directories, your SAMLs, and we're going to layer on top of it the ability to do two-factor authentication. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a stronger mechanism to ensure that the people touching that data are the people that you want, the ones that they say they are. When a user is touching that data, we're going to give enhanced user access controls. And what does this look like? Well, I think a lot of administrators are used to NAS boxes today. They have CIS file shares, and they go in there and they set up groups with permissions. And that's very well established. I think every IT director knows how to do that, but that's not as straightforward when we start talking about moving your data to the cloud. You don't have the same regulations and controls when you put your data into Dropbox or Box or Amazon S3. And so what the File Fabric is going to give you, and we'll show this in the demo later, is the ability to add these ACLs to a cloud-based storage system, and to audit who's touching it, who should have access, and to categorize that personal data. Nothing would be complete without a full data audit, and again, this is something that a lot of those tools are missing today. You don't know who touched the data, you don't know what IP address it came from. You're going to have a hard time in the case of a breach of finding out, who breached you, how the data was breached, where it was accessed from. And so ensuring that your system has a full data auditing path is another key piece to that GDPR compliance. Of course, nothing would be complete without encryption. Jim brought this up before. What you need is, according to Article 32, something that is FIPS compliant. We're using AES 256 encryption. And what that's going to do is it's going to safeguard your data. So if we go back to some of that data that's been put in, Amazon's S3 cloud, there's nothing wrong with putting the data in the cloud. What happened was the users did not set up the policies on the bucket properly, and the policy allowed for public viewing of that data. And so you can imagine that if that data was encrypted before it went up to Amazon, that even if those policies were set up wrong, that the data that was then pulled by somebody with malicious intention would not have access to the data. Of course, everybody has the problem today with legacy applications, and there's even a section in GDPR talking about legacy. And so what the File Fabric is going to do is it's saying take some of those legacy protocols, FTP, SFTP, FTPS, WebDev, and it's going to secure them as well. It's going to give you that same single pane of glass view into that legacy data. You're going to be able to securely protect it, encrypt it, log it, and I'm sure a few people are looking at this slide right now going, well, what about CIFS and NFS? You keep talking about my documents. What you're going to see later is that the File Fabric has applications that are communicating over HTTPS, and they're going to eliminate the traditional need for mapping drives with CIFS or NFS, replacing that with something that's going to give you protection for your data both in flight and at rest. As Jim brought up before, an important piece of GDPR right now that you should be addressing today is to discover the data that's out there that is in violation. You need to get your arms wrapped around it. And so again, the suggestion is to have a compliance officer assigned to GDPR, and what they're going to need is a tool that's going to allow them to search the files, get their arms around what's out there, and not just search file names, but the ability to look for content inside the actual files. And so what you're seeing on the screen right now is the Storage Made Easy solution has the ability to index the content inside Word files, Excel files, PDFs, etc. And you're going to be able to search inside there. Now we're making a number of enhancements to our system around GDPR compliance, enhancing this functionality because, again, we already know all the content inside files, and so adding further tools that are going to allow that GDPR officer to just, at a single click of the button, find all data that could be in violation of GDPR, data containing personal information, and then to classify and tag that data so that it can be easily found. And I'll be showing this in my demo, but I want to find personal data. As you can see, I've got several tags on that. The reason the one credit card is bigger is because I have more files relating to credit card information than PII or Social Security in the system. And so the ability to quickly find and classify your data. Of course, one key element is real-time notifications in case of a breach. So if your data is breached, you need to follow certain protocols. And what we enable you to do is not just, from time to time go through your auditing data, but make that auditing data work for you. And so you're able to set up what we call audit watches, which is the ability to set an auditing rule that if that rule is triggered immediately and notifies you. And so some of our customers use this as a honeypot, a honeypot being data that's maybe fake that you put out there with the intention of somebody trying to touch. And so if you start getting hits on that honeypot, you know that you're actively being trolled, or an employee is actively looking in areas that maybe they shouldn't be, and potentially some corrections need to be made, or putting these notifications on the real data, so that should somebody that shouldn't be accessing the data does find a way to access it, that you're immediately notified. And then lastly, we all know that in today's age, you need to collaborate. In fact, that's the reason on that first slide that so much data is out there on the internet, and it's in your Googles, your Dropboxes. That's why IT administrators have lost control of the data. The first thing is probably, SMTP is a very old protocol, and for the most part, it's pretty difficult to share an email with over 25 meg attachment. And so what you see is users putting these files that are ballooning in size, out there on the internet, in the S3 buckets, in the Dropboxes, and then sharing out links. And what happens is the IT administrators, the GDPR compliance officer, has no knowledge as to what's been shared, how it's been shared. That link could fall into somebody else's hands and access multiple times. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give you the ability to share data and share it securely. And we're going to give you a couple of options there. We're going to give you the ability to expire data automatically after a certain amount of time. So if I share a link with you in this example, that link is going to be dead in 5 days, and that is preset by the organization's administrator and cannot be altered. We can set a download limit. So if I send out a link and it should only be downloaded one time, we can set that limit and say this link is only valid for a single time use. And of course, we can set a password on any of the links, and we can have the org admin require that when sharing the data externally. And what you're going to see is that screen on the right, where if somebody accesses the link for the file, they're going to need to put in a password. And again, this is all going to be done very simply over the web with a web browser. I think we've all received emails from other companies in the past where they go, hey, we're trying to share secure data with you. You need to log into the site. You need to set up an account. Maybe you need a certain type of encryption mechanism. This is all taken care of in a much more elegant fashion. So we're adding that ease of use, which means your end users and your customers are going to be happy, but we're still giving you all the protections. And so without further ado, what I'd like to do is an actual demo. I'm going to show you how we can assign data policies for encryption, secure auditing, file sharing. We're going to go out and we're going to look for some PII data or some under GDPR personal data. We're going to demonstrate encryption at rest. The first thing we'll do is we'll secure some data on a on-prem solution, so like a zip share, and then we'll demonstrate the same thing using Dropbox in the cloud. Of course, I talked about legacy protocols, so I'll be demonstrating how easy it is if you have applications that are still using FTP or WebDev. Obviously, that list is longer than those two protocols, but in the effort of time, we'll limit it to them. We'll do a secure share. We'll work on the enhanced ACLs, including a web-only view, and of course, we'll look through the audit logs. So at this point, I am going to share a different screen with everybody, so please hold on. Very good. And Jim, you guys should be seeing the File Fabric in a web browser.
Yeah.
All right. Well, excellent, guys. So here's what we are looking at. I am logged in right now to our File Fabric in the web view, and I am an administrator. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to set up some policies on my data. Now, most of these I've preset, but I just want to show you how easy it is to set these policies on my data. So under user governance, I can control whether or not they can migrate data, whether or not they can download files from the web. So if I don't want them to be able to migrate data, I just turn that feature off, and it's no longer available in the system. I can set policies on how we share data. So remember, in my previous slide, I had the ability to force all shared links to have an expiration. And remember, we talked about the ability to limit the number of downloads. Well, if I wanted to enforce a limit, I can do that here. Probably the most important one that we can talk about is the encryption of the data. And so the File Fabric from Storage Made Easy has a number of options to encrypt your data. And the easiest one by far is what I'm demonstrating right here. I put in a passphrase, and I've selected all data in all users' files. And so what this is going to do is any data passing through the Storage Made Easy File Fabric is going to be encrypted before it ends up on the backend storage. Now, some of you may say, well, some backend storage like Amazon has SSE or SSEC encryption, or certain filers have encryption as well. Well, Storage Made Easy ties into those. So if you were to work with Amazon S3 storage, you can also set that up. And so, in my opinion, it would be better to have Amazon encrypting the data with SSEC and have this option on, because at the end of the day, if you double encrypt your data, that's going to be much safer from a GDPR perspective than not encrypting your data at all. And so this is by far the easiest option, but again, there are many ways that we can take care of encryption depending on your backend. Of course, there's data versioning and trash capabilities so that users can roll back to previous versions of their actual data. And under security was kind of the last thing I wanted to bring up, are policies for how we're going to audit the data. And at this point, I'm going to audit basically everything. And we're going to go ahead and work in the system, and we're going to show you how some of that data is then audited and appears to the organization administrator. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch to a different screen, and let me just tell you what I've done. In our File Fabric, I've connected to a CIF share that's already existing in my environment. And that CIF share has a finance folder, a human resources folder, and a marketing folder. And this little icon here says that I've shared these files, and I've shared them with different users in different groups, just like you do with Windows or Windows-based ACLs. And so if I want to protect this HR data, I can do things such as setting permissions that the human resource group can read, download, read, write this data. But the accounting team, if we look at them, they can only read the data. And in fact, I'm going to make it even a little bit tighter. They can only do it in this web view. What you're going to see in a minute is that obviously not all users want to use a web interface for accessing their data. We have specific desktop tools for Windows, Mac, and Linux, as well as iOS and Android, that are going to apply to this rule. And so now if I flip over to a user, and this user is my CFO, the CFO is in the finance group, you can see that the CFO has access to the finance data, but the HR data, if I look at this, it's kind of a lighter shade of gray. I don't know if that's really coming across in the GoToMeeting, but the reason why is because this is web-only view data. And so if I click this data and I want to view it, I'll pop it up in another screen to make it easy for everybody. But what you'll be able to see is this is clearly personal information defined under GDPR. It's got people's names, date of birth, and their email addresses. And so this is data that we've collected on them. And what I want to do is I want to ensure that this data, if needed by the finance team, can be accessed read-only in this view. However, if they were logged into their Windows machine and they just had their File Fabric mapped as the S drive, I've got the exact same files and folders. If I go into Finance, you'll be able to see that I can open a file such as expired credit cards, which again is GDPR data, and work on this. But if I go into that HR folder, I can see the names of the files, and we'll just wait for this message to clear. What this is in our system, if a user opens a file, we want to make sure we lock it so that if another user tries to open the same file in Excel, they're told that somebody already has this open for read-write, and that's taken care of automatically in the File Fabric. So now I'm in the HR folder, and I want to work on this personal information. And what we're going to see is that this has been restricted to web-only access, and so I'm not able to use this information at all. If I want to use it, I'm going to have to do it over here in the File Fabric through the web view. So let's go ahead and close this. Let's clear that error so that it doesn't come up anymore. So now, as the CFO, I want to work with some data, and I want to do two things. The first thing is maybe I just want to look for some data very quickly. And the data I want to look for, I do want to look for personal data, so that's the type of data or tag that I'm going to be looking for. Oh, and I guess I did not give my CFO access to those tag groups, but let me show you as the admin. If I go into the personal data, this is where I can see the credit card information, PII, Social Security-based information. So if I click Social Security, I can see that this employee data contains Social Security numbers. If I want PII information, I can see that this file contains PII. If I want credit card information, I can see that these files contain credit cards. And the way that I can find this if I'm looking for something like that is to use our advanced search mechanisms. And so, for example, maybe I am looking for Visa cards. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use wildcards, I'm going to do that search. And again, I've searched in these files and I've specifically found the word Visa. What you see with other systems out there is the ability to search file names, but searching file names really isn't good enough if you're actually looking for personal data that could land you in hot water with GDPR. And so the ability to search this, to download it if needed, or view it, and I can view it again full page, and see that this very much indeed has usernames and credit card informations. All right, now let's deal with the encryption that we talked about before. So all of this data that we put out here, I've already told you is encrypted, and I just want to, really show you that feature. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to the CFO's desktop. The CFO prefers to just have a map drive, this S drive, and they've got some important information that they're going to put into the finance folder. And so if I look at this important information, it's a clear text file. And the reason it's clear text is because I want to be able to demonstrate to everybody how easy it is that it's seamlessly encrypted. So this is what the file says. If I open it up, it says this is a clear text file with important information. It needs to be encrypted. I'm going to just drag it from my desktop right into the finance folder. And so now what I've done is I've uploaded this file to the Storage Made Easy cloud. Again, if I double-click this file, it looks exactly the same as it did before. Now we talked about that this is actually a slip share that maybe is on my NetApp or my Isilon or whatever SAN or NAS I prefer to use. And so what I've done is I've cheated. I've gone in the back and I've mapped this as my F drive directly as the shared drive. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to do this in the future. You'd only want to access these files through the file fabric for security reasons. But if a user did happen to find that this share was out there and they mapped the drive letter and possibly it wasn't protected properly in CIFS, they'd be able to see the files inside the finance folder. So now let's open the same file, but again, we're cheating right now. We're going through to the back-end storage and we're taking this file kind of the same way a hacker would. And as we can see, this file is very much unusable. It's already been encrypted. Now, I know a number of you probably aren't concerned about data that is possibly behind your firewall. Maybe you think, okay, my NAS, my firewall, everything is already protected well. And so what I'd like to do is another example. And in this example, I've allowed my CFO to map a Dropbox folder. So these are, a real Dropbox account, as we'll see in a minute. I'm going to go into a financial data folder. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take that important information. I'm going to copy it into this folder. And this is one of the main benefits of Storage Made Easy. We're going to give you a single pane of glass across all your storage. And so this could be Dropbox files. It could be Salesforce. It could be SharePoint. It can be, Azure or Amazon or Office 365. And so I've put this file into my Dropbox. Again, if I double click it, I can see that it's clear text. Everything opens absolutely perfectly. But now if I actually go into my Dropbox account through the web interface, and so maybe this is that S3 bucket that was shared improperly, maybe my Dropbox was shared improperly, I'm going to see that, hey, I've got this file, it's 29 seconds old. I'm going to open it, And when I try to open it, I can see this absolute gibberish. And so this is what's protecting you when you're putting your data into the cloud, such that should somebody do something inappropriately, maybe in Dropbox right now, I share this file out with somebody instead of using the file fabric, it doesn't matter. The data is still secure and protected. So speaking of that, why don't we go ahead and share that file out? And I can do that from the desktop view, or I can do it from the web view. So why don't we go into my Dropbox files. I've got that important information. I'm going to check off that I would like to share it. I'm going to share it by URL. And again, because what I'm going to do is at the end of the day, I'm going to email this out to somebody. And what we want to get you out of is the habit of attaching files in your email. When you attach files in your email, you're doing two things. The first one is you're disseminating data, and you're disseminating it in a way that isn't really efficient. That email can be forwarded on to more people and whatnot. You're losing control and tracking. Instead, what we'd prefer you do, and I think a lot of organizations would prefer, is that you create a shared link to that data and you put that link in your email. And of course, you can send the links by email. And so what I have here is the option to share this file. My admin has already enforced that it cannot be shared for more than 5 days. I am going to limit it to being downloaded twice. And I'm going to set a password. In fact, I'm just going to use a simple password, And I'm going to generate my link. So now if I take this link and I paste it in a window, what I'm presented with is the need to enter my password. So I'll go ahead and put that in. And I can download this file, important information. It's going to be decrypted when I download it, so let's download it here. Let's open it up. Now I'm opening it up on a Mac, and so I've got my important information that needs to be encrypted. If I was to open another browser, so let's say Opera, and I was to paste that link again, I'll be able to download it one more time. And at this point, I'm going to have hit the max number of downloads for this file. And so the next thing that we'll want to do, so you can see it downloaded up here, is to push our luck and open it one more time. So let's open a Firefox window just so I'm not getting any content cache. And so I'm presented with the link again. And this time when I hit download file, I'm told that the number of downloads has been reached for this file. So again, securing your information. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons I'm doing all of this is so that we can go back and we can look at some of these logs. So let's go back in as the admin, and let's go to our audit logs and just see what's happened so far. So I have complete audit logs, and you can see I've been working as the CFO. You can see that I've been accessing these files through the Windows tools. That's this desktop over here. You can also see that I've accessed some of these tools and downloads through a website. And so I've accessed them obviously all from the same IP address, but here are my logs of actually downloading those two files. If I scroll down a little bit, I've got full information of login information, of changing options in the system. I did this, remember when we were first in the system, I changed the policy. And so what you have here is a complete audit log that's going to allow you to know who downloaded files, who touched files, when, what IP address, and what tool they used. And these audit logs are exportable via a CSV file or Excel. They can be put into a syslogger and mined by something like Splunk or ServiceNow. Or if you'd like to be a little bit more advanced, they're also accessible by API. And so you can write your own software against it, push it into yet another system, or even have, say, Splunk access it via API. So now let's see what happens when I want to access some of this data through legacy protocols. So I'm going back to my desktop. I'm the finance user. Now, normally a user probably wouldn't be accessing data via FTP or webdev or SFTP. It's much more likely that this is going to be an application they have. And so this could be a video recording application. This could be older software that was written to use FTP. But what I'm showing you here is that I'm using a program called WinSCP, and I'm going to log in as FTP. Now, of course, I wouldn't advocate continuing to use FTP with GDPR because FTP is an unencrypted protocol unless I use FTPS or SFTP. But I am going to access it this way just for purpose of the demo. And so when I do, let's try that again. Maybe I have information. Oh, I did. I typed it in wrong. So let's use this one here. What I had done was I put in the wrong host name before this demo. So let's access this data instead via webdev. So I'm logging in as the CFO via webdev. Again, webdev is a very common protocol, especially in a lot of web systems. And so you can see that I've got the exact same files. I've got my finance file, I've got my marketing files, I've got my Dropbox files. And so if I want to go into, say, marketing, I want to go and pull a logo. So let's pull the Storage Made Easy logo. We will go ahead and download it. And if I go into my files, that should have downloaded to, I believe, Documents. I've got my Storage Made Easy logo through WebDev. If we now go back and we look at what's happened as the org admin, we can now see that yet another tool has been accessed by us. So we can see that the CFO logged in via, we call it Cloud Dev. If I had used FTP, this would have said FTP. And I can see that this is the file that I have accessed, the IP address that I've accessed it from, and the tool that I've used, which is WebDev. And so at this point, Jim, I believe that I've shown everybody that we talked about in the demo. So I am going to pass control back. If anybody has any questions, I'm glad to address those as well.
Thanks, Doug. So I think we've reached the end of the webinar for today. Storage Made Easy is an international company. We've got people in the UK, the US, and also in Europe. So if you do indeed want to talk to us about GDPR, then we'd be more than happy to talk with you and hook you up with one of our GDPR experts. If you'd like to access the white papers that we talked about today, they're available from our website. You can just sign up and download them. And I believe, Anna, you'll be sending this video out to the people who subscribe to this webinar after the recording has been edited and polished and made available.
Yeah, sure. In a few days' time, yeah, they will be receiving the email.
I think all that we have left now is, any questions that people asked. So we have only one question, which is, will GDPR be applicable to the UK in light of Brexit? So I think there's two facets to that. I think the first one is that, of course, until we actually Brexit, then we would need to adhere to the GDPR regulations. But also in the last few days, the government has announced that their intention is to tighten up our own data privacy regulations and to make them have some synergy with what is the GDPR, so that we can continue to trade with Europe effectively. So I don't think that Brexit will have any effect on companies who will need to actually get their house in order to comply with the GDPR, because essentially we'll be running something in the UK even post Brexit, something that is very synergistic to allow international trade, particularly around personal data. I think that's the only question we have. So on that note, I'd like to thank Doug for his demo and Anna for her introductions, and wish you all a good day. And again, if you do have any other questions, by all means, feel free to get in touch with us, and Anna will be sending out a recording of this video with slides and link to the white paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.